Welcome everyone to another episode of Price Targets with your host Bitcoin Jack. Welcome back. We're going to be looking at the Bitcoin chart today. We're going to also be looking at ETH, and we're going to do things a little bit differently. I mean, price hasn't been doing all that much. I think the last video was in the neighborhood around 46 K, and prices just has been ranging. So I'm going to dive into a few different charts to kind of recoup my reasoning on Twitter and my over time increasingly bullish bias. So we're going to be doing a couple of fun different kind of charts, and then we're going to dive into the price action, what I'm seeing, what I'm expecting for the weeks to come. So essentially there's been this chart floating on Twitter, and a lot of people were asking me what's up with that. The chart on my Twitter is actually without all the price action up here, but it's this green line that everyone was asking about. And essentially what we're looking at here is the cumulative volume delta, and that is market buys minus market sells. So orders that are executed aggressively against the market that are immediately filled and matched against the book. And the one key takeaway here on Finex is that overall, it's been in a downtrend. So essentially what I do interpret here is that Finex has a constant selling pressure of participants that do not put things directly on the books, but they just, they move it into Finex and they liquidate it, whether that's miners or some other kind of cash flow that people have. There's been this continuous trend down, and on average, you could probably extract that it's around 500 BTC over time. Like if we take the average from July July 2020, July 2019 until now, it's more or less 500. I didn't run the numbers exactly, but I have taken some samples, and it's around there in that neighborhood. So essentially what that means that, when we have periods where this CVD stops trending down, it is either that this continuous cash flow is paused, and that's, in my opinion, more likely, because I do think that flow is just, it's always there. When this thing goes sideways, it's logical to assume it's being met with some kind of aggressive market buying demand that offsets it, right? So essentially what we see here, after the March 2020 crash, it would go sideways, and we can see, if we grab kind of the same area of time, that it was some kind of accumulation bottom that resulted in the rally to 20k, 30k, 60k, right? And essentially, there's multiple times in time where this constant selling pressure has been met by buying pressure, and essentially it only it's a short sample, but it has led to upside. Now we can see here that the accumulation kind of stopped, which is, not illogical, because price just started to move, and then it continued its previous descent down. And more recently, what we see here is it's going sideways, and it kind of stopped following its trend as price came into the 30k demand zone, right? So essentially, if my assumptions are correct here, this is a pretty bullish signal. In my opinion, Bitfinex is at the center of liquidity. Obviously, exchanges like FTX have been growing insanely, but Bitfinex has always been at the center, and some of the smartest and biggest whales are involved at Bitfinex. So seeing this makes me a bull in general. That doesn't mean, that price cannot reset or retrace or anything at all, because, the larger players will accumulate their positions and they will be less prone to price movements in general. But I do think that this is leading into bull market continuation. So that's pretty cool, I think. I could be wrong, obviously, and then, I hope that we're going to be fine. Next chart is exchange balances have been coming down yet again. And we're getting close to, lower lows in that sense. So pretty much, if this can continue, I think that's a pretty bullish thing. And at the same time, we can look at the USDT balances on chain. On the exchanges. It's gotta do a little bit of loading here. There we go. So you've seen an increase right here on the 23rd of August that I'm quite bullish on. I've seen some articles explaining that people are cashing out to USDT. It is possible, but generally there will be USDT on exchanges, and that amount will remain unchanged even when people actually go to USDT. Generally, it's just going to be on there, and there's going to be balance to it. This actually are inflows. I think it's new money getting deposited into the exchanges, and perhaps I can show you exchanges. There we go. Net position change. You can see that it's been flowing into the exchange. So pretty bullish on that side perspective. These are just two things, but I think I could, grab a few more charts and show a couple of signals / just general high time frame trend signals or interpretations that kind of do aid my general bias. So essentially, got a lot of shit on for this chart, by the way, on Twitter. This is the exact chart that I posted, I think, yesterday on the 28 signals to buy and sell on a macro perspective. And someone was joking. I drew this in Microsoft Paint, and then someone just kept bitching about it. Anyways, not going to give too much attention to that. Let me reload this. This hasn't been firing all that often. It's not necessarily a giant, it's not as good to indicate like tops or bottoms or anything, but it's really, in my opinion, some of my best high time frame trend signals. Obviously this was pretty close to the top, but you can see that there's been occasions where it has been, literally here, it would have sold the exact bottom right here on the March COVID crash, and then it would go long way later. So it's it's not any holy grail or whatever. And there's been other times where it's timed to market pretty nicely here. It had a fake out right there. But generally, it's just a good indicator of a short time period and a long time period where I'm waiting not just the price, but I'm looking at various on-chain metrics that are incorporated into the formula, whether we're bullish or bearish. And in my opinion, this does kind of support my bias. So obviously I'm going to post it, but out of all the signals it has shared over the couple of the last, 8 years, it's been some of the, the cleanest high time frame bias signals to have. So generally, you don't buy these just straight away unless you're comfortable holding spot, but they're just a good indication that as long as the green signal is alive, buying is probably a good idea. So that doesn't mean that this cannot correct then here or whatever, but it is generally telling me that my long bias is a bias that is a good bias. And the other thing that I really like, it's not necessarily that we're above the cloud, but we're finally actually seeing the Tenkan here coming above the cloud. So on a daily time frame, I think that's a pretty neat signal. We can go back in time, but every time this crosses up, in general, has led to some kind of rally. Happened right here, happened right here, right here, right here. Happened right there. So you can check this for yourself. I don't need to like go back in time and completely show everything on this, but it's a really cool thing to see that we're actually above it. And generally, I would have expected that price, if we were bearish, it would have crushed it straight down immediately. The other thing that's really bullish, in my opinion, if you like to trade this system, is the fact that we're going to have a cross coming up pretty soon. So essentially, generally, my opinion is that once this crosses, that's a future date to possibly look out for some bearish bias, bearish setups. And so it's not going to cross here today, but end of September, early October looks like a good time to maybe have a little looky and get some short exposure or hedge or take profit. Next thing, and this is something that got inspired by someone on Twitter. His handle is Personality Son, and it's basically taking the S&P 500 and to the power of 5. So it kind of makes the S&P 500 grow stronger, more parabolic, quote unquote, relative to BTC. So it kind of flattens out the chart a little bit. And what's funny is that there is a super cyclical movement when we actually grab a sine wave, and we can see that this chart, this hiking Ashi chart, is moving at a pretty precise rhythm. So basically the low here, and then in between, halfway, kind of peaks, the bottom here, not exactly the middle here, but kind of comes down, and this is kind of the bottom again, and then this is kind of the middle of that again, and then here's the bottom. And essentially, if this chart goes up, Bitcoin is outperforming the S&P 500 that we've to the power of 5. So essentially, it's outperforming at a very good rate. And if that is somewhat, that doesn't have to be bullish per se. If this chart goes up, generally it is just a sign that Bitcoin is winning in terms of S&P valuation. But I do think that if the S&P 500 is going to go up and price is actually this chart is actually going to follow the latest rhythm, then obviously that means BTC is in for a really good ride. So we're going to have a little look at the S&P 500. We did that 2 weeks ago. We're going to do it again today, as the chart that I shared back then kind of does look pretty good. But before we do that, we're going to jump into a few other charts, have a little look. Here is the Fear and Greed Index that I've also shared on Twitter, and it's been in its third week of optimism. So tonight, Sunday, weekly close, price will have to start moving this week to the upside to keep optimism going. If this kind of goes from gray to white, as has happened in the past, as you can see in this chart, then I'm probably gonna be in this decision where it kind of feels there's going to be a lot of time decay on long positions. So fees will, start eating me, or price is just not going to move that much. So if that's going to happen, I'm going to be waiting until we actually kind of get back into the gray, and if that happens at all, right? But as long as we're trending in kind of optimism in the gray boxes, gray areas, that's good for me, and hopefully that can continue. I think that kind of sums up a bit of I think I have a lot of on-chain charts that I could be sharing, but this is already taking me 15 minutes just to gloss over. So I think I'm gonna jump into BTC. Obviously, when we look at the weekly chart, big resistance, pretty much. Okay, so let me explain the severity or how interesting this level is. So essentially, in this area, that block. Let me just grab some kind of rectangle. So essentially, in this block, I mean, I was buying here too, and eventually got crushed when we started to come to the downside. But what really happened here is that these were like the last resort buyers, and huge retail inflows happened, you know, in this entire block. So essentially, what happens is that if we go through here, that means either there's no sellers left who bought in this region, or whoever bought there is not willing to sell. And it's literally, in my opinion, kind of the last resistance into new all-time highs. I mean, you know, this high up here, it's not necessarily, you know, the last bit of resistance. There's obviously, you know, there's a high here and a high here, but in my opinion, this is where sellers really took control of the market, started to dump down, and crushed the buyers that bought here. And obviously, buyers that bought, you know, like prior to that move, but some of those could have already sold. So all the buyers in here absolutely got crushed. If price manages to start trading through it, that means, you know, they're not there anymore to sell. So either they already sold, or they are very strong-handed and they didn't fucking sell this entire pullback. Okay, so breaking this, you know, essentially starting from here, in my opinion, is super bullish. And doesn't mean that we go above here straight away. You know, it depends. Like, I don't want to jump the gun. That will happen. It's very possible that it's gonna get rejected and come down here. But managing to actually fill the liquidity in this block is a very promising feat if that happens. So it's also why the market obviously is being kept here. Daily, not much has changed, so, you know, we can be pretty short about it. In my opinion, key level here at 46 has been defended last week. We talked about that on Twitter. I added at 46.5, and as I said 2 weeks ago, you know, if we manage to hold this, I do think that we're going to fill this. So essentially, that's just what I'm waiting for. Could happen this week, could not happen at all. And, you know, to the downside, my invalidation is pretty clear. It's going to be, you know, once this region is not, you know, when they cannot defend that region. Jump into ETHUSD real quickly. This basically has been the high time frame chart that I've been looking at for ETH. Resistance here. If we start breaking through this, especially considering, you know, the time that we've spent here in this range between, well, let's say 3K and 34-ish, 3400-ish. So essentially, if we start breaking above this and we can hold it, it's not, when it does not become a fake out, then there's not a lot of, you know, resistance left to the upside, and I do think it's going to go to all-time highs and beyond. Okay, so and essentially what that means is that if that's going to happen, I do think it's going to come back and retest this diagonal. So we got that out of the way. I mean, we could go have a little look at ETH BTC, because that's really where I've been basing my trade decisions on. Let's go to the daily. If you remember correctly, last video we talked about if price would lose this red box to get out and you know, ditch the trade ID. If it can reclaim it, which we didn't talk about back then I do think that the original plan that goes into the 0.089-ish, 0.086-ish area and these highs here. If this happens, I do think that's going to happen. But right now, it's below this 0.0680-ish level, and as long as we stay under there, I do think that price is gonna, either keep ranging. I would definitely have a little try to get back long in the 0.063-ish range if price gets there, and if it's going to come down here, that's where things started, will start to look very, very bad. And I do think the green line here at 0.046 is going to be it. It's going to, there's no need to really jump the gun here and say what's going to happen, but I'm not too eager to really become super bullish until the level here is broken. I should have brought some water. I didn't. Oh, here's water. My throat goes dry from all this talking. So 21 minutes in. I think the last subject that I want to touch upon is the S&P 500. We looked at this chart, right? And then a couple of weeks ago, we looked at this chart. And I do think that we're going to see how the week opens, but what I did say is that if we break through gray, if we manage to break through gray, I do think that we're going to see an acceleration in the months to come, into early next year, into, I don't know, potentially 5,500 valuation of the S&P 500. So I think that kind of is showing some confirmation. And let's summarize. The Fed talked about inflation and economic outlook last week. Essentially, there were a bunch of people that were just saying inconclusive things like would, should, whatever. And then Powell came up. The other guys did sound pretty hawkish. And then Powell was like, well, we're going to see what we got to do, but we really cannot do it right now. And he was pretty dovish. So essentially, I do think that eventually tapering is going to happen, but they're going to be pushing it down the road, and rate hike is not going to happen before employment gets back up to the levels where it needs to be. And I do think that claimless jobs was higher than expected, so we're just going to have to keep a look on that. But I do think it just it's way too early for them to start tapering. Maybe they're going to start reducing buybacks and the program by the end of the year, and before they're done scaling that back, it's going to be summer 2022, right? So maybe then a rate hike can happen. And honestly, if a rate hike happens, a lot of weird things eventually are going to happen. So, but that's a far time out. Okay, so this does tie into this chart where the expectation, if the pattern repeats, is that the next couple of months, in terms of price, let's say right here, 25th of October, the 22nd of November, maybe slightly later in this kind of pattern cycle thingy, for Bitcoin to be bullish on top of the S&P 500. So, that's, when you look at this chart and it's going to follow that pattern, that's a pretty bullish thing to behold. I think that's it. 24 minutes. It's going to take a while to upload this, probably around 20 minutes to get it uploaded. Thank you, and catch you next week.